Sheik and Stasiak coming after that cage. Stasiak is on the inside. The Sheik on the outside trying to get in.
My goodness, welcome back to another edition of Wrestling Real Talk. This is A.T. Huck, I'm Rudy Hill, and today we are going to talk about, in my eyes and in so many others, one of the greatest professional wrestlers to ever step into the squared circle. Of course, I'm talking about the genius known as the Sheik.
The Sheik has arrived with a selected member of his harem. She's in the process of spraying her master with a delightful fragrance known as A Night in a Parisian Market or Old Sweat Size.
The Sheik, the former United States heavyweight champion, the one who held the United States championship longer than anybody in all of professional wrestling. Of course, he was the Madman from the Middle East. He reigned havoc all over the world, including in these two guys' lives right here. Let's talk about the Sheik.
Oh my God, my first memory of professional wrestling is the Sheik. I'm watching television, flicking through channels, and I see this crazy guy eating paper. And my sister, Jessie, I remember asking her, I was dumbfounded. I was like, what is this? And she said, you never saw wrestling before? And I was like, no. And he was eating a program or something and eating on the guy's tie. And then subsequently, I saw him after that just destroying people. On television. I was just amazed at this phenomenon, of wrestling.
Yes.
And it was because of what I saw of the Sheik.
Now, he was definitely a man who was far ahead of his time.
Oh, yeah.
Especially from back then. Tell me, what was your first impression when you got to see him live for the first time? Do you remember seeing him live for the first time?
I saw several shows at Kobo live. The exact first one, I don't remember, which one was first.
Right.
But I saw the Sheik wrestle Luis Martinez. He was supposed to wrestle Bruno Sammartino that night.
Okay.
And Bruno didn't show up. They said his father was ill, but of course there was something else that went on.
Right.
But the Sheik and Luis Martinez went for almost an hour.
Wow.
In that match.
Wow.
That was one of the greatest matches I've ever seen in my life.
Wow.
And for the most part, Luis Martinez had the Sheik in a headlock. But the way they did it, every time the Sheik would get out of it, Louis would grab that headlock, take him back over, and just work that headlock the whole match, and the Sheik was just limp.
Yeah.
Couldn't recover from that.
Right.
And it was a time limit. It went to the time limit.
Wow.
And of course, the next time we went, the Sheik just destroyed Luis Martinez. After that, he kicked his butt. Going back, I saw the Sheik wrestle Edouard Carpentier.
Yeah.
I saw him wrestle Lord Layton. I saw him wrestle Bobo Brazil. I saw him wrestle Luke Klein. I saw him wrestle the Mighty Igor, Tex McKenzie, Pampero Firpo. The list goes on and on. I was going to a lot of those shows at Cobo Arena in the early 70s.
Now, when you were in Georgia when you were in college, were they still talking about Sheik on Georgia Championship? Was it ever brought up again in the 80s?
Well, the Sheik, when I was in Georgia, no, there was no talk about Detroit wrestling.
Yeah.
Not until much later.
Right.
However, one point where I was home for Christmas, And I didn't know at the time, but the Sheik was in Georgia Championship Wrestling.
Oh, no.
And I missed it because I was here in Detroit.
So he was maybe at the Omni?
Yeah, he was at the Omni and he wrestled Buzz Sawyer.
Oh, no.
I remember when I was in college, Thunderbolt Patterson, they ran a rival promotion against Georgia Championship Wrestling at the Omni.
Whoa.
And it was the Sheik versus Thunderbolt Patterson at the Omni in opposition to Georgia Championship.
Right. Do you remember the name of the promotion?
I don't remember the name of the promotion, and I didn't go. Surprisingly, I didn't go.
Oh.
But they did run against Georgia Championship.
Wow.
But the Sheik wrestled all over the country before that.
Right.
You know, he wrestled in Georgia, he wrestled in Florida, he wrestled all over.
Texas.
California, Hawaii.
Yeah.
Was Bruno's opponent in New York. He wrestled Pedro Morales,
Wow.
you know, in California. He was America's champion out that way.
Uh-huh.
A lot of the Detroit wrestlers wrestled in Los Angeles, Bobo
Right.
Brazil and
Right.
Igor,
Right.
you know, a lot of them in the Sheik.
Sheik, infamous feud with Freddie Blassie.
Freddie Blassie and John Tolis.
John Tolis.
You know, out in California. Yeah, in Toronto, the Sheik had one of the longest winning streaks. His winning streak in Toronto may have been longer than it was here in Detroit.
That's where he beat up Andre the
Remember, folks, at this time, the Sheik undefeated in Toronto in 7 years, and the fans packed the Maple Leaf Gardens on this night to see the Sheik defeated for the first time in 7 years. But as you can see, it wasn't to be. The fireball, you couldn't see a good shot of it because of the camera angle, but the fire in the face.
Yeah, I don't know if he beat him up. You know, Andre, you know, had the majority of the match, but the Sheik threw fire. You know, I think it was a Texas death match maybe.
Right.
And Andre wasn't able to recover from
Right.
that. You know, a lot of people were upset. They just knew the Sheik was going to lose to Andre.
It was going to be it.
Yeah, but the Sheik, everybody who came through Detroit, you know, big name wrestled the Sheik. Abdullah the Butcher was somebody that came in and out. You know, he was here in Detroit for a long period, but there wasn't an area that Abby dominated like the Sheik did.
Yeah.
You know, Abby is a legend, you know, without a doubt.
Yeah.
But he was more popular in certain places.
Yeah.
You know, the Sheik everywhere he went, so did Abby.
Yeah.
But Abby never had a territory that was built around him.
Yeah.
You know, like the Sheik.
You wouldn't say Puerto Rico?
That was Carlos
I mean,
Colon.
Carlos, you know.
That was Carlos Colon.
Yeah,
You
or
know,
Japan.
Yeah, even Abdullah the Butcher was very popular in Japan, but that was Antonio Inoki and Baba
Okay.
were the mainstays. They were the Sheiks
Yeah.
of Japan.
So like I said, an Abdullah the Butcher who's kind of was similar to the Sheik style, and what would you say about a Bruiser Brody having the same legacy as the Sheik, or was his even better?
Well, it's hard to say. You know, I think the Sheik is an all-time great. He's an all-time great because of what he did here in Detroit. You know, makes him maybe a step above certain people.
Yeah.
You know, in that aspect. Bruiser Brody is one of my all-time favorites. You know, everywhere he was like Abby. Everywhere he went, you know, he was going to make an impact. Everywhere he could go, anywhere he wanted to. So
Kind
could
of like
Abby.
the Briscoe brothers in this day and age. Like,
right.
You know.
Right, like the Briscoe brothers. I guess you would say that.
I mean, they're going in and they're doing their
thing and getting
gone.
out.
That's it. You know. I respect that.
But Bruiser Brody and Abdullah the Butcher are timeless. You know, the Sheik during his time did all that.
Yeah.
You know, during the time when Abby and Brody were doing all that, the Sheik was older. He wasn't doing as much
Right.
as he was. He had already cemented his legacy.
His legacy.
Made his name in professional wrestling by taking cheap shots, by fighting dirty, by bringing all kinds of sharp objects into the ring to use on his
He had
opponent.
already been all over the world and had his promotion, but he was still making an impact. His big match in FMW when he teamed with Sabu
Yeah.
in the fire match,
Oh my
that was in the 90s.
Yes.
That was in the 90s. The Sheik started in maybe the late 40s.
Right.
You know, come on, that's a long time.
Was Sheik on the level of a world champion? Should he have been a world champion in your eyes? I mean, I know that holds a lot of weight, especially like in the late 70s, early 80s, where you had a Flair and you had a Bockwinkel and you had a,
I would probably say, and it's hard for me to say that, I'd probably say no.
Yeah.
Yeah. At that time, when you're talking about, the Sheik was up in age.
Yeah.
And he still had his own promotion. You know, to be world champion, you have to travel and be all these different places, and you're obligated to the other promoters.
Right.
You know, and the Sheik was highly respected, but he didn't get along with all these other promoters all the time like that. You know, I don't think it would have worked.
Yeah.
You know, just like I don't think Bruiser Brody as world champion may have worked.
Yeah.
You know, you got to be the right guy, the right businessman to be world champion.
Gotcha.
You know, would I have loved to see the Sheik as world champion? Oh my God, yes, that would have been crazy.
Right.
But I don't think that would have worked for everybody.
Right. Do you think really the downfall of big time wrestling was the Sheik and not giving a chance to some of the younger talent to maybe uplift the championship and uplift the houses and center around some of those young guys that were coming in left and right, and he would just it's pretty much the same thing as Memphis. You knew someone was coming in to work Lawler, and you knew Lawler was going over, and subsequently Lawler's promotion did the same nosedive. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think part of it was that. You know, part of it was the economy. You know, here in Detroit, you know, the Sheik did have other champions. You know, Mark Lewin was champion, Don Kent was champion, Bobo was champion. You know, there were other champions here in Detroit. Gino Hernandez was champion.
Right.
You know, so he did try other things.
But my point was it time where he'd step back, which for a man like Sheik, I know we both knew him personally.
Yeah.
For him to step back and let this run without him for, and then make your comeback.
Yeah.
Do you think that that would ever work?
Well, he didn't.
Right.
But would it have worked in retrospect?
Maybe a Terry Funk helped.
Well, you know, in retrospect, we say, oh man, he should have done this and he should have done that. But some of those wrestlers like Randy Savage, they weren't the Randy Savage that we knew later.
Right.
You know, you would have to be a guru.
Right.
And say, man, I should let Randy Savage be champion in 1979.
Right. Right.
You know, who knew?
Right.
You know, Terry Funk had already been world champion, and I think if the promotion had lasted, he may have been in that spot.
Right.
We don't know all of the minutiae that was going on at the time behind the scenes with the money and with Kobo and the contracts, because when they stopped running at Kobo, they were still running.
Oh yeah.
You know, they were at Lincoln Park and they were doing other shows.
Yeah.
They lost their TV spot.
Yeah.
I think when they went from channel maybe 50 to 62 and some of the other broadcast networks that didn't go as far as their original station they were on, that hurt.
Yeah.
You know, because they were drawing people in from Ohio and other parts of Michigan were coming to Kobo. You know, and when you couldn't see it in all those places, the attendance started to dwindle.
Sure.
You didn't have good TV coverage.
Sure.
In retrospect, yeah, we can sit here and be, you know, armchair quarterbacks all we want and say he should have done this and he should have done that.
Right.
I think, yeah, the Sheik maybe should have teamed up with Abdullah and let somebody else, Terry Funk or Randy Savage or Austin Idol, get their run as U.S. champion instead of Bobo and Igor.
Right.
You know, they had been around for so long, people kind of got, you know, disenchanted. It got stale a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, I remember going to Kobo late in my teens, because I kind of fell off at one point, but the Sheik was wrestling Furpo, and I hadn't seen it, in a while. And I was like, I'm going to see this. And the match lasted 2 minutes. And I was a little disappointed. I was like, man, he beat Furpo that easily.
Right.
It was like, seemed like just a money grab instead of really trying to push the product and go forward with anything at that time.
Right. Sheik definitely was an influence.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to throw some names at you of some other Sheiks. And I'd like to hear the comparison with the Sheik and, let's say, Sheik Adnan El-Casey.
Sheik Adnan El-Casey, before that, was wrestled as a Native American.
Okay.
There's a match I just watched not long ago with him versus the original Sheik from maybe Hawaii.
Okay.
And he was, I'm going to say Indian. He was an Indian wrestler, native wrestler. And the Sheik just destroyed him. That was definitely a takeoff on the Sheik.
Yeah.
It was different than the Sheik. He was a manager. He spoke.
Right.
And he, managed Ken Patera and Crusher Blackwell. And that was an AWA thing.
Yeah.
Sheik Adnan El-Casey didn't take that all over.
Right.
That was AWA.
I mean, the most famous Sheik of all, the Iron Sheik.
The Iron Sheik. That didn't bother me too much. He was different than the Sheik.
Yeah.
I say the Sheik. He was probably a better technical wrestler.
Better athlete?
He was probably a better athlete.
Yeah.
He was an Olympic wrestler. He helped train, for the Olympics.
Yeah.
So he could probably out-wrestle the Sheik.
Sure.
But I bet if they were booked in a match when the Sheik was in his prime, the Iron Sheik would have been a bloody mess.
Yeah, no doubt.
The Sheik, it would have been a different story,
What would have been that one dream match that you would have liked to have seen the Sheik happen that never came to be?
That never happened with the Sheik? Oh, wow. I guess it would have to be Ric Flair. Because the Sheik wrestled just about everybody else.
Now, weren't they teasing that in I Like to Hurt People, where they were going to wrestle on top of the Renaissance?
Right. They were going to wrestle on top of the Renaissance. That was on I Like to Hurt People.
Yes, and then there was a for those of you who are watching us, there was a local television show here in Detroit called Kelly and Company. And they went on there and they said that the Sheik was going to wrestle Ric Flair at the Pontiac Silverdome.
I don't know if there were any real talks with that. Was that just hype? Was that Flair putting it out there? But was there ever any communication with Ric Flair and the Sheik about that match?
Right.
Because I think Ric Flair was all about making money.
Yeah.
I know he has talked poorly about the original Sheik.
Yes, he has. And
I know that.
That saddens me. Man.
Yeah,
Really
but
does.
he has opinions about other wrestlers too.
Right.
That he worked with.
Right.
I don't know if they ever really talked.
Right.
We don't know. We'd have to ask Ric Flair. He's still alive.
No doubt. We talk about the Sheik, and we talk about the impact that he left in the world. Do you think that maybe if the Sheik were to still be here, what would his views be on the world of wrestling today, do you think?
Wow. That's kind of hard to say. I think he'd be upset with the workers, as am I.
Yeah.
I think...
That break kayfabe?
Yeah. I think that a lot of what happens today in wrestling is our fault, as the workers. Let the fans think whatever they want to think. That doesn't mean that you have to say it yourself.
That's right.
Magicians, for the most part, don't go out and tell people how they do their tricks.
Yes.
That hurts their income.
Yes.
People want to suspend their imagination. They want to believe that you're actually pulling a rabbit out the hat.
Yes.
That you're actually sawing somebody in half. if you know how to do it yourself, why are you going to go pay to see somebody do it? You know, you're supposed to maintain that aura of larger than life.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
and I wish that was, and I would think the Sheik would feel the same.
We would be remiss if we didn't mention the Sheiks family, who is very much instrumental in his career and in his business.
Yes.
Of course, Joyce, Farhad,
his wife.
beautiful lady, wonderful soul.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Someone who I was very fortunate enough to meet and know. And what were your views on Joyce?
Oh, Joyce was great. You know, I met her a few times.
Yeah.
You know, when they were in Lincoln Park was the first time I actually met her. And that's when the Sheik gave me this T-shirt. You know, Joyce was there with him. And then later, the Sheik called me on the phone one day. And I was like, this is the Sheik calling me on the phone. You know, and he wanted me to meet him and Joyce up near Lansing. It was before they went to FMW. He needed footage of Sabu. And I guess Malcolm told him that I had VHS tapes, you know, from the Azteca Hall. So me and Esther, my wife, we drove up to Lansing to meet the Sheik and Joyce. And wow, they wanted us to go to dinner, but Esther and I, we had just eaten dinner. We had been somewhere else.
Right.
So we, you know, just sat in the parking lot for a while and we talked, and you know, I gave him the tapes to send over to FMW of Sabu. I don't know if he ever used them or not.
Sure.
But I gave them to him, and he gave me a body press.
Nice.
You know, he gave me a body press.
You
and
still have it?
I still have it.
Yeah.
One I won't sell because he
Right.
gave it to me just like he gave me this.
Right.
And he gave me this.
Right.
But Joyce was nice, and she and Esther talked, you know, and, you know, it was great. And then I met Joyce again years later. Eddie Jr.
Yes.
wanted me to co-promote with him.
Okay.
He actually wanted me to be his promoter in Detroit.
Okay.
You know, and I went and met with him and his brother Tom.
Tom, yeah.
And their mother at Tom's auto repair place.
Yeah.
And man, I gotta say, I turned it down, but I was so honored at the fact that his family came to meet with me
Yes.
for me to be their promoter.
Yes.
And Frank was there too. I always bring Frank with me. You know, and he remembers that to this day, and we talked, and I just didn't think that it would work.
Right.
You know, I didn't think that me and Eddie would get along, you know.
He had a reputation of not getting along with very many people. What were your initial thoughts on not Ed Farhad Jr., but the performer, the wrestler, Captain Ed George?
To be honest with
yes,
you,
I want to hear your honesty.
to be honest with you, during that time when Captain Ed George was wrestling, I had fallen off.
Okay.
And I wasn't watching. I didn't see him until I Like to Hurt People.
Okay.
That I remember.
Right.
You know, I wasn't watching that much.
Right.
But what I saw in I Like to Hurt People, I liked it. You know, he was wrestling Don Kent.
Kent, yes.
Yeah, that was good.
Yes.
Now, from everybody's opinion that was there at that time, didn't think that much of his wrestling ability.
Right.
I didn't get to know Eddie Jr. until years later.
Right.
You know, when he started promoting again.
Right.
And man, he was a different cat. You know, I don't know if this has been said on film or not. And rest in peace.
Yes.
You know, I remember going up to Flint, I believe. And I was there with Monty Brown.
Okay.
You know, I had taken Yukon Braxton there.
Right.
And I think Sabu asked me to take him up there, and I went, and I was going to referee. Sabu told me to referee, and Eddie kind of blew me off, you know. But I was kind of taken aback at that. But I remember he was talking to Monty Brown.
Okay.
And he wanted Monty Brown to do this gimmick, and he said, "I want to call you Spear Chucker." And then Monty, we looked at each other like, is he out of his mind? And Monty was like, no. And Eddie was clueless. He didn't see what was wrong with that, you know? But he wanted to call Monty Brown Spear Chucker.
Oh my goodness.
You know, which definitely was, you know,
right.
something that wouldn't go over very
Not
well.
At all. Not
you
at
know?
all.
But he had crazy ideas like that, like Hot Stuff Rivera. He was using names from the past.
Right.
You know, calling people Wildfire.
Well, wait a minute. He almost crossed the line when trying to make a young guy be Sweet Daddy. Let's talk about that because I'll tell you what, man. Immediately when I seen that and I heard that.
Well, let's be honest. It was Kadeem Muhammad.
It was Kadeem Muhammad, and I reached out to him and I said, "Let me tell you something, man. If you take on that, you're gonna have a real problem with a lot of people, including me."
Well, you weren't the only one. I reached out to him and I told Kadeem, I was like, "You don't know me very well. I don't know if you've heard of me before, but don't do that."
Right.
You know, you cannot do that.
Right.
It was disrespectful. Even though there were other Sweet Daddies, there was Sweet Daddy Siki.
Yes.
But here in Michigan, and I think that was taking a jab at Sweet Daddy Malcolm Monroe, or DBA at the time.
Right.
Because this is when Sweet Daddy had passed already.
Right.
To call this young black wrestler in Michigan Sweet Daddy.
Right.
You know, and of course, Kadeem, on his behalf, he didn't do it.
He didn't do it. I commend him for that.
But Eddie, you know, he made different, bad decisions. Yeah. There's a whole thing, and I think it might be an episode on Big Time Memories right now, where the box office was robbed.
Oh yeah.
You know, and there's speculation, that Eddie had something to do with that.
Shout out to Big Time Memories, Terry
Big Time Memories.
And
Dave Drayson.
Oh my God, you're not going to believe it. The box office has been robbed. There is no money.
Oh yeah.
Back to the Sheik.
Back to the Sheik. Sheik, when he was young, Sheik was very fast. Very fast. Man, he would jump over the ropes, out to the ring, back into the ring, out to the floor.
Oh, yeah.
He was all over the place.
Oh yeah.
And then he evolved, because early Sheik was not using foreign objects and throwing fire.
Right.
He was wrestling.
Right.
I watched a match just the other day with, was it the Guru or Tom Jones?
Okay.
Maybe the Guru.
Okay.
And the Sheik beat him with a hammerlock, a flying hammerlock. He just kept flipping over, holding on to that hammerlock, and he submitted. It wasn't the camel clutch.
Wow.
The Sheik wrestled.
Right.
Early on. And then he evolved and changed, where he started doing all the crazy stuff with the pencil and throwing fire and wrapping a hanger around the guy's neck. All that crazy. He was hardcore, ultra violent, but there was still nothing that was gonna hurt you physically.
Right.
By flying over the top rope through tables. Right. They didn't do all of that back then. They may have used a table, but it was in a different way. Sabu, of course.
Talk a little bit about Sabu. Let's talk about, we both were exposed to Sabu around the same time. I mean, really exposed.
It really exposed him to get to know him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And your views on Sabu, and should Sabu be in the Hall of Fame?
Oh, wow.
Into business and promoters. However, let's not face the fact that he changed wrestling.
Yeah. Well, I'd say Sabu should be in the Hall of Fame. He contributed a lot to professional wrestling when he was in the limelight.
Yeah.
A lot of guys patterned themselves after Sabu. Rob Van Dam patterned himself after Sabu.
Yes.
Even though, Rob came into his own and did his own thing. Sabu helped train Rob.
Yeah.
But a lot of the wrestlers that came along later, everybody who broke a table, the way they broke tables got it from Sabu.
Right.
Sabu, I, had many conversations with him, and he went to the WWE, went to WCW.
Yeah.
In the WWE, they wanted to change his gimmick.
Yeah, they did.
And he didn't want to change his gimmick.
He was going to be the Sultan.
But they also
excuse me,
shot a gimmick to him where he was more like a street fighter.
Oh no.
Yeah, he was like a street fighter.
Yeah.
Maybe bandana and that type of thing, and he didn't want to change his gimmick.
Right.
Which I think they frowned upon.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he didn't get the push there that he expected. And then, I love Sabu, but sometimes his matches are hit or miss.
Oh, yeah.
And he would do things where they might call it, what do they call it now? botch, but Sabu, if he quote unquote botched something, he'd go back and do it again.
Yeah.
But I remember his match with Rey Mysterio, which was phenomenal, and that was the best match I remember him having.
I'll tell you, one of the matches that I thought was amazing.
They didn't let him do his thing.
Right. One of the matches that I thought was amazing was him against John Cena.
John Cena, that was good. That was good. But for some reason, they didn't let him go.
Yes.
Like they should have let him go.
And any final words that you would like to say about the greatest?
Ooh.
Dare I say the greatest? You say Ric Flair, I say Sheik.
Well, I mean, the Sheik is my all-time favorite.
Yeah.
He's my all-time favorite.
Yeah.
But our conversation, who was the greatest, I still have to say it was Ric Flair.
Fair enough.
But the Sheik is my all-time favorite. Without the Sheik, I wouldn't have the love for professional wrestling that I have today. When I go looking for wrestling on YouTube, I look for Sheik. I very rarely go looking for Ric Flair matches.
Right.
But I want to see, man, can I find some old big-time wrestling that I haven't seen with the Sheik versus Johnny Valentine or Pompero Firpo?
Yeah.
I love it when I come across something of the Sheik that I haven't seen.
Yeah.
Which is very rare.
Right.
I had a conversation with the Sheik about old tapes. And this is what he told me, because everybody asking about him. This came from the Sheik's mouth. He said he took out his back seat of his Cadillac and filled it up with tapes that he had out in his storage unit. And he took them to Florida to Pedro Martinez.
Okay.
This is what came out the Sheik's mouth, and he sold them to Pedro Martinez. And Pedro, I don't know, he died or whatever. I don't know who has all that the Sheik took down there in his car.
Wow.
If they still exist or whatever. But the Sheik told me this from his mouth to my ears.
Right.
That's what happened to a lot of those tapes. Some of them deteriorated in his storage unit. Some of them were taped over back in the day. But he did take a lot down there to Florida. Now, who has them now? I hope they pop up somewhere.
Right, they preserve them some way, somehow. Again, final words on Sheik.
One of the greatest of all time, definitely an icon here in Michigan, California, Japan. I don't think there'll ever be another like him.
No way.
Never.
No way. Well, there you have it. It's been Wrestling Real Talk with A.T. Huck and Rudy. We'll see you next time right here on Rocks TV.